A general inquiry into the causes and the nature of police militarization in the United States of America. This video is going to be focusing on the development and the evolution of police militarization in the United States. It's the police agency in the United States started with as-needed militias and posses. These would generally be assembled by a governor or the mayor of a specific town for the purposes of apprehending a specific individual. It was until after the War of the Rebellion, also known as the U.S. Civil War, in approximately 1870, that policing achieved a sort of modern incarnation in the United States, rather emulating the development of police in the United Kingdom. As one can see from the image on the left, the uniform worn by that police officer is very similar to those worn by the famous bobbies of London. Throughout the middle of the 20th century, a mythology developed about policing in the United States. These are sort of exemplified by the television programs Car 54, Where Are You?, a very comedic take, and The Andy Griffith Show, depicting a very homespun, very wholesome take on policing, which shaped the image in the US population of what a police officer was. Prior to this, and in certain populations across the United States, policing had a very different image. Police were often employed for things like strike breaking or oppressing various minority groups. They certainly didn't have the homespun and wholesome image. It's simply that was the prevailing image that individuals sought to perpetuate. Now, once that image began to crack and shatter into pieces was approximately the 1990s. What happened in the 1990s to reshape the image of policing? The big thing, or the major event of the 1990s, was the end of the Cold War. This forced several changes across the world. Governments across Europe and the Soviet Union sold off weapons and military equipment, from tanks to uniforms, to secure some form of income. Anyone who is familiar with the movie God of War, or Lord of War, should be familiar with this phenomenon. Anyone who visited East Germany in the 1980s is going to also be familiar with what is called the Great East German Closing Down Sale. The next event in the 1990s, again, that really helped to reshape the image of policing was the 1997 1033 program, which enabled police agencies to purchase surplus military equipment from private military contractors and defense contractors. The aim of this program was to preserve the skill set amongst those defense contractors in critical areas should they ever be needed, like creating armor, steel, or creating mechanized vehicles. Ultimately, its goals, if one would permit such a term, were ultimately wholesome, but the implementation of that plan wasn't necessarily in the positive. Initially, police agencies across the United States ignored this, however, because they rather saw that they didn't need things like armored personnel carriers, M113s or APCs, or mine-resistant armored personnel carriers, MRAPs. However, late in 1997, their whole image changed. What forced this reconsideration, this reimagining of the purpose of policing, was the North Hollywood bank robbery, also known as the North Hollywood incident. What traumatized, or how this traumatized police agencies across the United States, is the perpetrators of the incident were able to obtain, through one method or another, military weapons, military-style weapons, like AK-47s and M15s and M18 rifles, including body armor. And unfortunately for the responding police agencies, their highest and most effective weapons against these perpetrators were shotguns, which were supplied with little better than birdshot. As such, they were forced to purchase, using whatever funds they had available at the moment, military-style weapons from local gun stores. In the aftermath and the after-action evaluations of this incident, police agencies sat up and took notice of the congressional deregulation that happened from the 1033 program. And they purchased in bulk military-style weapons and armored personnel carriers, in the fear that if this ever happened again, they didn't want to be caught unprepared. Another thing that happened as a result, a little bit later, was the enabling of private military contractors to now provide training and support to police agencies across the United States. This caused a shift in mindset of police officers from the more Andy Griffith Show or Barney Fife or Car 54 mentality of the friendly neighborhood police officer to something more akin to a 1st Infantry soldier patrolling someplace like Baghdad in Iraq, or some other similar combat zone. This led to the perpetuation of notions that ultimately derive from such noted books as Mein Kampf, as the idea of the three-tiered society is made up of the wolf, the sheep, and the sheepdog. These have little reference to modern society, but were perpetuated and popularized across police agencies because of fear of a repeat of the 1997 North Hollywood shootout. Unfortunately, this fear of a repeat of that event persists until the current year, 2022. It is only now, in the face of public scrutiny, that this is showing any signs of being reversed. Whether or not this is the correct course of action remains to be seen, but what is obvious is that there needs to be a difference, and there should logically be a difference between police forces and military forces. Thanks very much for paying attention to the entire video. If you did, if you clicked off, hey, thanks very much anyway, and have a good rest of the week and stay safe.